I am Dr. Gabriela Lemus. I am the Executive Director of Maryland Latinos Unidos. Welcome to our monthly People's Policy Series meeting. We're so excited to have you today. We're going to have a rather, what I hope will be an intriguing and delightful presentation. I have with us two very important guests, two mayors. Mayor Monica Casañas from the city of Colmar Park and Mayor Kate Stewart from the city of Takoma Park. We're going to talk a little bit about how they're getting ready during this election cycle, the immigrant vote in their cities, and the issues affecting the Hispanic community that resides there. But beforehand, I am going to show all of you, share with you a brief PowerPoint that I developed to give you a sense of what some of the community survey research is indicating nationally about how people are feeling today in Maryland's Latino community. So let me share document. Nope, wrong one. Okay, sorry, I have two PowerPoints going at the same time, and that is never a good thing. Okay, we're gonna go up here. So I'm gonna, we have entitled it Nuestro Voto Cuenta, our vote counts. And, you know, in every election cycle, there's always a moment where who's gonna turn out to vote? Will they turn out to vote? Why are they voting? And it impacts all of us, whether we're in the government sector, the nonprofit sector, obviously cities and counties, et cetera. And so, and then there's always the discussion around the sleeping giant, the Latino vote. But I think this is really, what I'd like to do today is actually a little bit broader. I am going to talk about what we're seeing in the Latino community. What might we expect in terms of, are the Latino voters asleep, right? So what we know is that Latinos are officially swing voters. We started seeing this in 2016 and then in 2018, and it remains stuck in the 2020 moment. So basically, we're seeing similar tendencies in voting patterns across the country, but even I think here in Maryland. The other part we're observing is that Latinos are not asleep. Latinos need persuasion. What we see is that a large group of Latinos really remain on the fence this election cycle, and are waiting to see what's going to happen. And I think probably about 67% of registered voters said they will turn out. We will see if that's actually so, and what the remaining 30%, 33% are going to do. So what I really wanted to focus on, though, is the why part. Why do Latinos turn out to vote, and what is salient to the Latino community right now? And what we're seeing is that Latinos are really concerned about the economy. They're really concerned about immigration, crime, and even women's reproductive rights. So this, when we're talking about the first point, which is they want to see investments in working families, we're talking housing, rental assistance, health insurance, which I think is something our mayors are probably seeing on the ground in their communities today. They also would like to see immigration reform. Now that's a federal issue, but they have gotten, I think we have gotten, I shouldn't say they, because I'm part of this community. I think collectively we would like to see change. We've been promised this throughout many election cycles, and we're still not seeing it. We're especially concerned about our Dreamers and our temporary protected status members, but also, a path to citizenship, including if it takes executive action, go for it. Violent crime really came up more, but actually it's more gun related after the Uvalde shootings. We had done at MLU a community survey at the beginning of the year in April and May, and we found that really healthcare was at the top of the issues, along with representation, education, environment. Those issues are still within the realm. But what happened after the Uvalde shooting, I think, and obviously, couple years after the El Paso shooting, is that they really is a feeling that we need universal background checks and mental health investments, which is also something that we're seeing with youth in the state. And then women's reproductive rights. The survey demonstrated that more than 70% of Latino voters thought it should remain legal, irrespective of what their perspectives were on the issue. The other thing is they wanted to get into details. So they were asking about the economy and what those things were. And when they said that inflation and the rising cost of living is really impacting them. So, and I think the mayors probably see this as well. Food and basic living expenses have gone way, way up. 85% of the community surveyed said, yeah. Gas prices, now this is September. We've seen some reductions in gas prices, but were they to go up again, once again, the Latino community would bring this up as an issue. Medication and healthcare, 48% are concerned about their expenses having gone up. School supplies and clothes, people felt it right now, right? Kids are going back to school, have been going back to school, and it's just gotten very expensive, even clothes. So when I say this, I just want us to think about what was happening economically, I don't know, at the beginning of the year when the supply chains were reducing. All of this is actually something that's been going on for a while, and it's been bubbling up to the surface. So then the last one I think is really important to bear in mind as well. Latino entrepreneurs are really concerned that the cost of doing business has gone up significantly, about 18%. And this is a real challenge because we all know that Latinos and Latinas we are an entrepreneurial bunch. I believe 1 in 5, or maybe it's 1 in 4, new businesses are Latina owned, which then gets me to the issue of crime and gun violence. So to disaggregate out, as you can see here, guns are too easy to access. About 72% said this. And this is what they are asking of their elected officials, mayors, that we need to find a way to put an end to school shootings, 60%. And again, going back to Uvalde, this is when we start seeing a raise up of this issue in our community. Community safety and mental health programs, again, the theme of mental health. And domestic violence is not taken sufficiently seriously by law enforcement in our communities. And then a sense that crime has gone up in their neighborhoods or communities. And sometimes I think in some cases, some of it is really because of media exposure, but some of it is real. Like some of it is, people are feeling pressure. It's been a long pandemic. The pandemic is still having economic, outcomes as well as social ones. Ergo the mental health. So the last slide I wanted to show you was because I think it's really important to think about this, community engagement in general, related to how we do business as agencies, as cities, et cetera. How do Latinos get their information? So what we're seeing is 16% get it mostly or always in Spanish. Another 16% get it mostly in Spanish, but also in English. Occasionally more English, but some Spanish, 34%. And I think that's an interesting group to look at. And then lastly, about 34% almost get all of their information and news via English language. So, for all of us as nonprofit organizations, as community leaders, and you as mayors, those are things that we face on a daily basis. How are we as nonprofits going to address that? And how are our mayors going to address this? So let me open it up to you, mayors, because obviously this is not about me. Let's start with you, Mayor Casañas. Tell us a little bit about Colmar Manor and your role as mayor and how that came to be.
Hi, good morning, everyone. So yeah, my name is Monica Casañas. I am actually a New Yorker, and I moved to the DC area about 20 years ago. And I was very focused on moving into a diverse community. And so I wanted to make sure that I was in a community that had all different types of people, because that's how I grew up. I actually happened to move to Takoma Park. And so I lived in Takoma Park for pretty much the entire time that I've been in Maryland. And it wasn't until I was priced out. Sorry, Mayor Stewart. Where I was looking to buy a home, that I stumbled upon this beautiful community called Colmar Manor. If you're not familiar with Colmar Manor, we are right on the DC Maryland border. So if you know where Mount Rainier is or Hyattsville, we're right next to the Bladensburg waterfront, and it's a small town that's considered a ports town, or port towns. And we have 1,600 residents in our community. We have 450 households. And by trade, before I ever even thought about becoming an elected official, I was a community organizer. So that's my background. I've been an organizer in the DC, Maryland area for about 15 plus years. I never thought that this was something that I was going to do where I lived. I kind of just wanted to be at home and just be at peace. I didn't want to have to go door knock and take up any fights. But the more I got involved in our community, the more I realized that there was a need, a very big need. And the reason I say this is the community that we live in, at least, if not more, 60% of the people that live in my community are Spanish speakers, and they're immigrants. I think that that number is probably a lot higher. So the makeup of our community, historically, from the 70s up until the 90s, it was a historically Black community. And then starting in the 80s, we started having an influx of Hispanics into the community, and now it's a majority Hispanic community. However, it's, we share that demographic with lots of other different groups. I decided to get involved, and this is what I've been told, that this is why people become elected officials, because they get very angry about something. And so I was very angry that there was no representation for Hispanics in my community. I noticed that there was nothing being translated, no intentional outreach done to this community. And so people felt very, very disconnected. And because of this and the push for non-citizen voting in the area, I decided that I wanted to run to be the mayor. It wasn't something I had ever thought that I would do. It was the last thing I ever thought I would do in my lifetime. But I worked really hard for it. I barely won, but I won, and it was a good challenge. So in our community, our election, we had 4 people run. So 2 current council members ran, the previous mayor ran, and then I ran. And so it was one of the highest turnouts.
So you beat the incumbent.
I did. So it was the highest turnout of voters. We had about 246 voters come out to vote. And I won by 4 votes.
Oh, wow. Well, congratulations.
Thank you. So the other person that she was very close, she's Filipina. And so that was super interesting. And that's why I decided to run. I had a very clear mandate, and I was very, very targeted in my outreach to voters. I'm going to run to push non-citizen voting in this community. Tell me what you think about this, because this is why I'm running. And so the mandate, and I've been reminded of this constantly, my mandate was push non-citizen voting through. So we were able to push it through by a very...
Wait, let's hold off on that. Let's wait for that until afterwards, because I'd like to have Mayor Kate Stewart introduce herself. And then let's talk about this immigrant voting piece and how this works out in each community, because I think Takoma Park has had their vote since 2012, right? Yeah. Okay. So
yeah, since 1993, actually.
93. There you go. So it's going to be an interesting contrast. So please, Mayor.
Great. Well, thank you so much. So I think we have the New York base in common. I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, and made my way down here to Maryland and Montgomery County. So it's a good foundation to work on these issues. So thank you for having me this morning. Yeah, I've been in Montgomery County in Maryland for the last 2 decades, and lucky to be the mayor in Takoma Park since 2015. And, you know, Takoma Park, we're right on the border of Washington, D.C. We're in Montgomery County, but we also border Prince George's, not so far from the other mayor's town. And, you know, we're about a bit over 17,000 people. A third of our residents have been born outside of the United States. So we do have a large immigrant population, and about 12% of the people who live in the community are Latino. And yeah, we've had, you know, resident non-citizen voting that we'll talk about in a moment since 1993. It was actually started by our now Congressman Jamie Raskin when he was on our city council many years ago, and I can give you the history of that. But I'll just say that, you know, from my perspective, representing a very diverse community, having ways in which members of the public can engage is very important, but also how everyone in our community who lives here can also hold our elected officials accountable and really participate in the process is so important. And so I'm looking forward to our conversation today.
So this is great. This is great. So before we get rolling, first, do you have any reactions to the issues that I presented to you in the PowerPoint related to the Latino community? Is that resonating with both of you at the local level as well? Let's start with you, Mayor Casañas, and then we'll pass back to you, Mayor Stewart.
For sure, safety is definitely a huge issue, especially in the DMV area. So one of the things that parents often ask me is for youth programming. And so that's a big deal in our community. So we're pushing and we're organizing to get youth programming, but also wellness programs. So we have, not in Colmar Manor specifically, but nationwide, we have high suicide rates. So right. I think that's something that affects the immigrant community too. It's just, I'm not sure if we're as vocal about it, but these are some things that we're implementing that are really helping people. So I think that safety, when you brought that up, I thought, yeah, it's a definite concern for our community.
And did you see a bump in your community after the Uvalde shooting? Not in terms of the violence, but the perception on the part of the community members feeling unsafe? This actually is for both of you to think about. Yeah.
I don't know if I saw anything. I think these communities are in a state of fear regardless. Mm-hmm. So it could have. I just don't know specifically if it did.
Okay. Mayor Stewart.
Yeah. So I would say, you know, COVID had, you know, such a huge impact on all of us, and in particular, the Latino community. And I just want to do a shout out. I know Kelly Omana is on listening today, and I just want to thank her so much for all the work that she did during COVID and continues to do in the public health realm. But, you know, there were huge disparities that we knew about before COVID, and then COVID hit us, and particularly hit the Latino community so hard that all of these disparities in, as you said before, the mental health area, medical health, getting access to accurate information and the healthcare they needed, in addition to the rental assistance and you know, even the small businesses. You know, even when we saw, and I saw the point what the small businesses said, you know, even when the funds were coming through at the county and state and federal level, what we saw in our community was it was hard for some of our smaller businesses to connect to that if they weren't already connected to a bank, you know, and had that relationship, or, you know, and many of our immigrant businesses didn't have that formal relationship. And so one of the things that we set up were some of these mini grants that could get out the door a lot faster. So everything that you showed us, I think, resonated very strongly. And these were things that we saw before COVID and have just gotten really much worse since then. And we need to address them in our communities.
So let's go to the immigrant vote now. Mayor Casañas, I cut you off. Let's hear your how you came about. You just got the law passed, right, recently? That's a big smile.
Yeah. I got elected in May. I led my first public meeting in June, and in July, the Hispanic organizing group in my community came and started demanding that we push this through. So then I started feeling pressured, and I was like, oh yes, okay, we got to get this done. And I asked them, I said, listen, just give me some time. We need to educate the public, even though we've been doing it for the past couple of years. I don't want this to come off as like the very, very first thing, even though it is, that I'm doing. And so I asked them to give me up until October. And in October, we passed a resolution to amend our town charter to allow anyone who lives in the town to be able to vote. It passed. We currently have 4 council members and then the mayor. 2 council members voted yes, 2 abstained. And then I broke the tie and I voted yes. Oh, wow. So according to our town charter, we have, or the residents have 40 days to fight this. And so they currently are. So there's a group that is being very proactive, and they are collecting signatures to have this go to a special election. And what I'm advocating for is, you elected us to make these decisions. And so I had a clear mandate, and the mandate was the election. I'm the mayor now. If you want this to go to a special election and a referendum, that's fine, but just be aware that you're having people who have power and privilege and the ability to vote, voting on those who are marginalized, and that never works out in their favor. So we have until the 21st of November to see if they collect the necessary signatures for this to go to a special election. So I'm hoping, fingers crossed, that we keep it the way it is now with this standing resolution, but we'll see. But for sure, one of the reasons why I got involved in the fight, obviously, is, as you mentioned, to keep elected officials accountable. I didn't have to go out and knock on the doors of people who couldn't vote, but I did. I don't know if anyone else who votes in the future or who have run in the past or will run in the future will have to do that. And I want to change it because everyone deserves to have a voice in their community. And that's where we're at right now.
Oh, wow. Okay. Exciting. You're in the news. And Mayor Stewart, so because there's a history now of immigrants, well, let's call it non-citizen residents voting, how does that look in Takoma Park? It's got to be now pretty much a turnout issue more than anything else, right?
Yeah, it is. And I know somebody asked us to describe non-citizen voting. So basically what it means is anyone who resides in our city limits in the city of Takoma Park. And actually we have 16 and 17-year-old voting as well. So if you are of the age of 16 or older, you register with the city and you can vote in our local elections. So this is just for our local elections that you can vote. Mm-hmm. Yeah, just to give some quick history, this happened back in 1993 when then now Congressman Raskin was on our city council. It was after the 1990 census. We just had the census here, but this was back in the 1990 census. And he was helping to redraw the district lines in the city, and noticed that some of our wards had, population-wise had a lot of people, but for voters, turnout wasn't very high. And one of the reasons was because of the high immigrant population there. And being the amazing person he is and scholar, Congressman Raskin, made the case that in the history of our country, that early on, the requirements for voting was not based on citizenship. It was based on property, gender, and race. So, if you were a free white male who owned property, you got to vote in this country. And it wasn't actually until the 19th century that with a lot of anti-immigrant legislation being passed and pushback on immigrants, that we then saw citizenship requirements in the country. And so, Congressman Raskin worked to get that passed. And in Takoma Park, we also, have a long history of being a sanctuary city as well. And so there were many people who, from Latin America, who moved to Takoma Park in the 80s and 90s because we were a sanctuary city. So it very much made sense for our community. So we've had it since the early 90s. And so what this means is that all you have to show to vote or to register to vote is that you've lived in the city, that you're a city resident. We don't ask your immigration status. So you could be someone who has a green card working towards citizenship. You could be someone who is undocumented, and we don't ask that at all. We just ask that you show your residency and you can vote in our local elections.
And how do they show their residency? Like with an electric bill and something like that? Okay.
Electric bill. Yeah.
And Mayor Casañas, have you had an opportunity to think about how it'll work in Colmar Manor when it passes?
So I'm lucky to be surrounded by communities like Takoma Park and Mountain Rainier and Hyattsville and Cheverly, who currently have this in place. So when we're talking about what the process is going to look like, it'll be similar to what Mayor Stewart discussed. In our case, people will have to prove that they've lived in our community. They need to have lived for at least 6 months. Unfortunately, I couldn't get the age 16 passed, and so the concession was 18 years and older. But we're going to have to start our own voter registration list apart from what the county has. So that's normally how the process works. And honestly, I feel like we're very lucky to live in the state of Maryland where this is available to people, because it's not the case, I think, nationwide where this is where this can be done. So this is specific to Maryland. And so I love living here.
I do too. I moved from far away DC, and I had to make a decision, Virginia, Maryland, and I was like, no, Maryland, bar none. I have to be in Maryland. This is a very immigrant receiving state. It's overall been just an incredible experience. So, okay, you both mentioned something. But let's talk a little bit about the 16-year-old voters. You say you cannot get them in Colmar Manor. That was the compromise, and yet in Takoma Park, that is the case. Tell us about our youth citizens and residents. Are they voting?
Yeah, so in Takoma Park, we've had that since 2013. And, young people really do turn out to vote. In fact, when you look at among those who are registered to vote, turnout is higher among our 16 and 17-year-olds than older voters. And so they really do turn out to vote. And they're very enthusiastic. And, I do see this, and this is anecdotal. I don't have any studies to go on, but we
like anecdotes.
Yeah. I do see in our community this sort of connection between young people voting and, you know, having, spreading the word about our resident non-citizen voting, because many times it's the 16 and 17-year-olds who are, you know, in school learning about voting. They may be on our youth council, they're active in the community, and, you know, they're telling their parents about voting and getting them to come to the polls and vote. And so for me as mayor, I have to say, the most satisfying thing and the best thing ever is during elections when you get whole families voting together.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And you see the different generations and everything. And it's just, I think that's just, especially with everything going on in our country right now, and the undermining of voting rights, to see families going out and voting together, I think is really important.
So let me ask you, because you just mentioned something, this voting rights component that we're seeing around the country. Have either of you gotten any pushback from just random community members about the fact that you're, you know, Colmar Manor's, you know, trying to get this done, and Takoma Park has been doing it for a while? Is there pushback still around immigrant or non-citizen residents voting? I got to get this terminology correct.
So there is, well, so we're calling it voter expansion,
Mm-hmm.
just to make it sound a little bit more inclusive. But yeah, there's definite pushback. I mean, there's a reason why there aren't that many municipalities in the state of Maryland that have enacted this. So even in my community, I'm close to Bladensburg. I'm close to Edmonston. They have not passed it, and those have very large immigrant communities. Why is that?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, at the end of the day, we are changing the existing structure of who has been voting, and so there's a fear. There's a fear of losing power. And so my job as an elected official is to say, we're not taking anything away. Really, you should see this as a moment to build coalitions, right? To coalition build. And so it's sad, but I think it takes a lot of education. Even in my community, there are some Hispanics that do not support this. So I think it just takes a lot of education, and if that fails, I mean, it's their prerogative if they don't want this to pass. But there is resistance for sure. But I do always kind of use the example of Takoma Park and like Hyatt. So I'm like, listen, they're still existing. They didn't burn down because we allowed non-citizen voting to take place. At the end of the day, we want people to be able to vote on the potholes, pothole repair in our communities.
Right.
That's that's not a big deal. But we want everyone to have a voice at the table.
Sure.
Yeah.
Mayor Stewart?
Yeah, at this point, most of the pushback I hear are folks outside the community. Every now and then, folks like to, put us on Fox News or Breitbart as an example of, something.
Democracy functioning. Okay.
Yeah. But at that time, then I will get a flood of phone calls on my city phone or emails from people from around the country, telling us how we're doing it all wrong to Takoma Park. But for the most part, I think in the community, because the 16 and 17-year-old voting is still fairly new, we were probably getting more pushback on that in recent years. But I think the more and more we have it, people just they get used to it, and it does build a stronger community. I see Nora had a question about our local elections just for mayor and city council. In Takoma Park, we vote for mayor and city council. Sometimes we have non-binding referendum questions. So actually, before we had 16 and 17-year-old voting or resident non-citizen voting, that was put on our ballot for residents to answer that question. But those are more just to gather information and input from voters. So that's basically it, though, mayor and city council.
So you mentioned that there's a youth council as well, and I was just wondering, is there, like, between election cycles, how do you communicate with your immigrant and youth voters? And then what are the issues that really get them, get their blood going?
Yeah.
Enthusiasm, build enthusiasm.
Right.
That's what we're doing.
Well, I think, in terms of engagement and communications, we can always do better. It's just sort of, and it's an ongoing process and learning that we need to do. The Youth Council, we just started in 2017, and it functions basically as an advisory group to the city council. And young people in middle school and high school serve for 1-year terms, but they can serve more than 1 year. And we look at them to help engage young people in the community, as well as when we do have policy or programs to come to us and provide their input before the city council votes on something. So I think that's really important for us. And in terms of community engagement, I think, as we talked about before, there's always the minimum of translation of information that needs to be done. And, we always put an emphasis on making sure that we have professional translators to do that work, and then have local native speakers review. Because I think it's so important that I've seen, unfortunately, too often that people are like, oh, I can speak Spanish, or I can, and translate something.
Yes.
And when, especially like when as I was talking about before, under COVID, it was so important that accurate information was being provided to people.
That's right.
We needed to make sure that we had that professional translation done. I think that's the minimum we need to be doing. And in Takoma Park, we translate almost everything into Spanish and Amharic because of the large Ethiopian community we have. But then it goes beyond that to really getting outside of our buildings and going to where people are. Because lots of times we can't just expect people in the community to always come to us. And also understanding that for many people who may have immigrated to the United States, they may be coming from places where going to the government wasn't such a great experience, and wasn't, and was actually dangerous for them. And so we need to really think about how we're engaging people so that there's a good entry into our city government. And again, I think this is why the voting is so important, because we want people to know we're a welcoming community and that their voice matters. And I think, again, voting is one of those ways to say, like, please tell us what you think about our government. Hold us accountable.
Mayor Casañas.
I just started engaging the youth, but what I will share is a quick little anecdote. So while I was campaigning for my election, I met a family, and the dad, I asked him, I'm like, are you registered to vote? And he said no. And I said, okay, well, let's get you registered to vote. Like, this is how you get registered. He registered to vote. And then he said, my son is here and I need him to like be more active in the community. I need him to go out and do things. And I said, okay, well, he can help me door knock. And so he helped me door knock. And one of the things that he's told me is that he wants to run for public office, which to me was just kind of like, okay, well, I'm gonna help you in whatever way I can, because you will. And what was most kind of rewarding for me is that when his father registered to vote, as Kate Stewart mentioned, we're getting families to go out and vote, or creating that habit and that routine. The first person that he ever, I get emotional when I talk about this. The first person that he ever voted for in the US was me. And that's a big deal to me. And so they are more involved in the community now, and that's very special.
That is amazing. Actually, I'm going to get a big heart there, because that's a lovely thing to hear. So I could probably pick your brains for a while longer. Are there any questions from our members for our mayors about their experiences helping promote democracy and you know, running a small town. I have a couple more, but they're a little bit more for the community members. Should I go for it, or does somebody want to hop in? Okay, Veronica.
So ladies, you are super impressive. Can you share with the group what you recommend to drive engagement? I mean, I heard both of you mention things that are really rough, you know, really tough. You fought, you went against the grain multiple places, and every time, you know, you're in the news in Takoma Park, you're getting all the extra negative press. But for those that are not in politics, for us that are a nonprofit in business, what are maybe top 1, top 2 recommendations to engage those diverse audience members that don't know? Their countries are very different, so you're changing their entire mindset because of historical perspective. But what could I walk away with that goes, oh, I didn't know that Latinos would do this? Any highlights that you can share for all of us to walk away?
I'll do mine real quick, Mayor Stewart. So one of the things that Mayor Stewart talked about is meeting people where they're at. And my husband coined this. He talked about the chancla method, right? So the chancla method is you go and you talk to the families, even if they can't vote, and you get them to get their kids to vote who can vote. So this is in relation to people who are non-citizens that have citizens in their families. So you get them to pull out their chancla and tell them, hey, you got to go vote.
I think you have to explain what the getting the chancla out means.
So in the Hispanic community, but I feel like it's in other communities as well, it's getting our grandmas and our moms and our aunts wear chanclas, which are flip-flops. And whenever they're reprimanding the kids, they take off their flip-flop and, you know, you get a little, and so that's what the chancla is.
Thank you. Mayor Stewart.
Yeah, I completely agree. When you asked the question, I wrote, show up and listen. That's the first thing. Like it's literally first, as an elected official or someone running or a nonprofit rep, is like, you need to show up in the community. And the first thing you need to do before starting to talk is really listen. Because that's, you know, that's when you're going to start making those connections and understanding where people are. And I'll just, you know, quickly tell this story. Before COVID, we used to do these morning coffees in the lobbies of apartment buildings, just to connect with people. We bring donuts and coffee. So as people were like walking out, taking kids to school or going to work, we would just like literally just say, hi, do you want to stay and talk for a few minutes, tell you about community programs, listen to some of your needs. And I remember there was one that we were doing in a building with some older residents. And so they hung out for a little longer because they weren't going to work or taking kids to school. And I was there for like about an hour. And there was 2 older women, Latinas, and I talked to them, came back, talked to them again. And it wasn't until the very end that one of the women said to her friend, tell the mayor. You wanted to tell her something, tell her. And it was about the fact that she had tripped on an uneven sidewalk and, you know, and that we needed to get fixed. But it took like it took this sort of back and forth, getting to know her in this space before she started to complain. She's like, oh, I don't want to complain to you. I'm like, you tripped on a sidewalk, complain. You know, and I think I've always held that story in that woman, because it shows me the importance of showing up and being present and, you know, and taking the time, because it took our time. I mean, you know, there are other people in my community who like would have been like knocking on my door like this with no problem complaining. But for her, she was just like, well, I don't want to bother you. And I'm like, it's not a bother. This is our job. So I just hold that experience to like making sure that we are available in there for all the members of our community.
That is amazing and such a great story. So I do have one other question. I'd like to take this opportunity. It's going to move us a little bit out more into the connectivity area between like nonprofit organizations and small towns and communities and what's small anymore. What can our members carry away? You have a lot of nonprofit leaders on. and small business and community leaders on this call. What advice would you give us in terms of how we work with local government, and especially since we may not know a lot about advocacy, or how we can help connect that advocacy in your communities?
Mm-hmm.
Either of you want to take a shot at that?
Quickly, for me, it's just about creating partnerships with your local governments. I mean, you probably already do this, but I don't know if you know, but we don't have a lot of money. Right. So we're always struggling to figure out how can we bring this to our community. So, for example, I'm partnering with a group now because our residents want English classes. And so they're tasked with going out and finding some instructors and coming back and having English classes. They're currently the people that are doing meditation and yoga at our town hall. And so I find that critical, partnering with the different nonprofits to do this type of work.
Great.
Yeah. I agree. And it's also, inviting us to see you in action in what you're doing, I think is really helpful. To both see like the barriers that the nonprofits are facing in doing their work, and really being able to, just see it firsthand. Because lots of times, when we're in a meeting or looking at the budget, it's numbers, right? The budget is just numbers, and you don't always see the people behind that. And so I think part of the good partnerships with the nonprofit and advocacy groups is when we're doing the budgets, when we're thinking about those things, to really hold the people that the numbers represent. And, building those kind of partnerships, like the mayor said, and being out in the community, I think is really important.
Mm-hmm.
May I ask a question?
Please.
Sorry.
Introduce yourself.
I wasn't able to raise my hand. Thank you so much, mayors. And you had mentioned not having a lot of financial resources at the town. I was wondering how the American Rescue Plan Act affected your town. How did you use those resources? And did any partnerships with nonprofits come out of that?
So quickly, we're in the process of actually allocating money and going through that whole process. I'm actually going to model some of the disbursements that we're going to do to community members after the Takoma Park. I saw you guys, and I saw you on the news talking about the money that you're going to be giving to residents, but we're still in the process. So it's not every municipality or local government is doing something different. But for instance, in Colmar Manor, we have set aside X amount of dollars, knowing that we're going to be giving this money to different nonprofits to work with us on different projects.
Yeah, I'll say in Takoma Park, as the mayor said, we did actually launched on Tuesday a direct cash assistance program where we're providing, using our ARPA dollars, $1,000 to families whose incomes are $50,000 or less. So it's a one-time cash assistance program, and we are partnering with local nonprofits to get the word out, to make sure people are, if they need assistance to apply, can do that. We also have partnered with local groups on who provide food distribution regarding that, and throughout the process, throughout COVID, using our CARE dollars before the ARPA dollars, it was, distributing funds to our local businesses and working with the Latino Economic Development Corp to really get, again, working with our nonprofit partners who will know members of the community, better than we can as the government, and really making sure that we're, because one of the things that we did with LEDC was want to make sure that our applications, we took applications in different languages. And so they helped in facilitating that and reviewing the grant applications from our small businesses. So those are some of the ways that we're using the ARPA dollars.
Okay, so we have 5 minutes left. Could I ask you to say some final thoughts that you'd like to share with your audience? Anything that, come on, you're on the spot.
Mayor,
Any pearls of wisdom we should know?
I can jump in. I want to say thank you for this opportunity. It's and to come and talk to you. I think one of the things that you know is I am very proud of is the fact that the elected leaders who came before me had the foresight to do some of this work, and I'm very fortunate to benefit from it and to stand on their shoulders and see, you know, what else we can do in the community. And it's very exciting to me to see other communities really taking this up and pushing for it.
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor Casañas?
Thank you. Yeah, I echo Mayor Stewart. Thank you for having me on here. I think it's super important that we continue educating our communities and just taking them by the hand and leading them to meetings, make space for them at you know, all the different tables that you all may sit at, include them in your networks. Even for myself, you know, I grew up in the US. I've been here my whole life. I'm educated. I get nervous. I would get nervous going to council meetings. I would get nervous becoming involved. I didn't think that I could run for elected office. It actually took, I believe the third Hispanic mayor in the state of Maryland. And it took the first Hispanic mayor in the state of Maryland to call me and push me and say, you need to run, because I didn't think that I could. And so just creating that legacy, I think, is super important.
That is super important. You know, and just as women, and then as Latinas also, I think we all, sometimes should I do that or not? And so it's always good to have those sisters and mothers and mentors who grab us by the hand or shove us from the back and say, go for it. You can do this. We've got your back. So that is great. So Veronica, any final words? So Veronica Kuhl, whom asked the question earlier, she is the chair of our steering committee and the co-founder of our organization. We have a number of board members on the call as well. Veronica, I usually give her the final word, so go for it.
No, thank you. Thank you so much, guys. Thank you for being the trailblazers that you are. I think it does create inspiration and hope for the future. I would just remind everyone that today, early voting begins. Early voting begins in the state of Maryland. So if you want change, you got to show up and play. So if we want our youth, if we want more stories like Monica's and Kate's, and even that young man whose first vote was for Monica as mayor, if we want that, señores, we must vote. So the State Board of Elections has the content in Spanish, in English. There's tons of activities. You can vote 3 ways: by mail, in person. You can go ahead and vote early. Early voting takes place now. If you are not registered to vote, Google it, ask anyone for help. But please, we're voting for our democracy, for our lives, our children, our family, our community. And if you cannot vote, like these ladies said, your children can, your neighbors can, your cousins can. So let's make sure that we make room for that to happen. Early voting, drop by mail, drop by mailbox, Dropbox, 24/7. There is zero excuse. So my 1 minute that I was allocated is really about our civic duty. Señores, and I know our children, our communities, a lot of us come from countries that have a lot of corruption, they're corrupt, and we don't think it matters. You just heard, again, Monica, she won by 4 votes. So that day that you're like, I know, que yo estoy cansada, yo me quedo en mi casa. She would have lost. So guys, please, early voting, the folks that are throwing information in there, thank you so much. our vote does count, and it's really for us. So a pleasure, and I'm so inspired by you guys. Thank you, thank you.
I am so grateful to you both. I am excited. I feel like I have a first. It's like a big first for me. So it's really wonderful. Have a wonderful rest of your day and weekend, and get ready for Dia de los Muertos. It's coming soon.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Have a great one. Thanks, everybody. Thank you for joining us.